options, all options should be considered in order to help the opposition and in order to enable greater support for the protection of civilians. I think it is important that we do this. I want a very clear message to go to President Assad that nothing is off the table, that further support, further work, further help with the opposition, who are now better formed, better organised, better coordinated, is robustly on the table.
The Prime Minister, but tonight Channel 4 News can reveal that rebel forces could be behind the latest atrocity in the Syrian civil war and not pro-government militia, as was reported earlier this week. The alleged massacre took place in the western Alawite section of Aqrab, northwest of Homs in the north of Syria. Several hundred villagers, who were all Alawites, the same sect as President Assad, were reportedly crammed into a large house after rebels attacked the town on the 2nd of December. The rebel version of events is very different. They say government militia imprisoned and killed up to 250 people. Our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, is the first independent journalist to get into the area. He's spoken to eyewitnesses who escaped the town and has this exclusive report.
Into the Badlands of central Syria, where some of the worst massacres of this war have taken place. A wrong turn here can mean being arrested, kidnapped, or worse. So an escort's vital. We're told to follow one car and then another. A journey of a few miles direct takes almost an hour. Finally, we reach Aqrab, a small place, 9,000 Sunni, 2,000 Alawite. We spoke to 3 people who'd escaped the town, all are Alawite, speaking in government areas. All spoke completely separately, in different places. None knew we'd interviewed the others, and no government official was present. Their stories corroborate each other in detail, as do those of many others we spoke to off camera. They completely contradict the version of Aqrab which has gone global, largely from rebel war propaganda websites. All sides agree Aqrab was attacked by rebels on Sunday, December the 2nd, but our eyewitnesses say Sunni rebels took hundreds of Alawite civilians as prisoner.
They had long beards, and sometimes you couldn't quite understand what they said. They were not dressed in the normal way.
At that point, gunfire from the direction of Aqrab forced us to move. All say the rebels came from the direction of Al-Hula, just 5 miles over these hills at the edge of town. It's the site of a massacre of 108 people in May, and it is a rebel stronghold.
They were wearing black ski masks. They took our phones and car keys. They forced us out of our homes and set fire to them. I hope God burns them like they burned our homes.
Hundreds of Alawites escaped the fighting to surrounding villages, but our witnesses say up to 500 were held prisoner by rebels after the attack. Held here in this red building where officials believe hundreds may still be held, and they're trying to get them free.
We would ask for food and they wouldn't give us food. Other villages would send us food, but they would take it for themselves and not give it to us. We asked for water, they wouldn't give us water. The little children with us started crying for food and water, so the mothers had to beat the children to silence them because they asked for food and water too much.
They tried to convince us to hand over the women to take them to Al-Hula. We didn't do that because we didn't trust them.
It went on for 9 days, and then from across town on Monday came a delegation including Aqrab's mayor and the imam. They wanted to try and free the women and children.
We said either we all go out together, including the sheikh and the mayor, or we all die together.
In the early hours of Tuesday morning, they all separately described 3 truckloads of prisoners somehow making it out along the road to Tauna village and safety. A 4th truck left, but never made it to the village. That truck went to rebel-held Al-Hula instead, and there, an unnamed woman and boy, apparently speaking under duress, told rebels that pro-government militias, not the rebels, took them prisoner. Fighting prevented us entering Aqrab, but from where we stood, we could see that the house everybody said they were kept in appears intact, as does much of the town. Further, Rebel YouTube postings from December the 2nd, the date of the assault, make no mention of hundreds of prisoners here. Why ignore a propaganda coup day after day? And why after Tuesday are there no pictures of the bodies or burials on rebel postings?
Hello everyone, welcome to GGN. Today is Friday, December 14th, 2012. I'm Darko, my website is ggnonline.com, and on YouTube is ddarko2012, and my other backup channel is ddarko2013. Alright, this first article I have up for you is Militants torch another Shia mosque in Syria. It says militant groups fighting against the government of Assad have torched another Shia mosque in the country. A video posted on the internet shows bearded men, the bearded men attack again, dressed in uniforms of the so-called Free Syrian Army celebrating the burning Hussein mosque. So it goes on here and it says a militant can be heard in the video using derogatory terms against Shias. So you saw in that video about how they were saying it was government forces. That's little tricks that they play. They abduct people, kidnap them, and they want ransoms. And then they have a twofold purpose, and they put it on there because these terrorists, they're very tech savvy, right? They're the modern terrorists where they can tweet and post Facebook messages and have their own YouTube channels, and that's how they're able to put out their propaganda. But it's not too hard to get people to confess to something that they didn't do or something that didn't happen, just basically by threatening them and their families. Car bombs killed 24 civilians on outskirts of Damascus as Al-Nusra claims credit for yesterday's bombing of Interior Ministry. The car bombings remain the order of the day in the area around the Syrian capital, Syria of Damascus, today, with another round of bombings killing at least 24 civilians, including a large number of them children. They say it was near a army housing complex, according to the rebels, but the car was parking close nearby to an elementary school, which bore the brunt of the blast. It says here that this Al-Nusra, which the U.S. is simply another name for al-Qaeda in Iraq, has regularly launched suicide and car bombings in recent months, causing major civilian casualties. The group has continued to grow in influence and is now seen as a vital part of the Syrian rebel forces. Just recently, remember that McClatchy article that we covered where it said al-Qaeda is key to overthrowing Assad. U.S.-backed Syrian opposition demands support for al-Qaeda. The U.S. hand-picked opposition leader Moaz Khatib wants U.S. to reconsider terror listing for al-Qaeda's al-Nusra Front. As part of the U.S. charade in declaring support and recognition of the so-called Syrian opposition, it added one of the more extreme groups that make up the militant front operating inside Syria to a list of sanctioned terrorist organizations. The idea was to have a scapegoat to pin the atrocities on, while the West armed, funded, and provided military support for the rest of the extremist groups ravaging Syria. The ploy quickly fell apart, however, when the U.S.'s own hand-picked opposition leader, Khatib, spoke out in protest. He goes on and he says that we disagree with some parties and their ideas and their political and ideological vision, but we affirm that all the guns of the rebels are aimed at overthrowing the tyrannical criminal regime. So he openly declares his intentions of establishing an Islamic State upon the ashes of the currently secular Syria. Like in other countries, he was also representative of Western big oil interests, in particular Royal Dutch Shell. He also has ties with the Muslim Brotherhood. It says here, U.S. recognition of Syrian militants is a violation of human rights, as the Iran cleric. Quote, recognizing the opposition of the Syrian government as the opposition coalition is a complete violation of human rights. He said here the United States is a frontrunner in human rights violations and has supported dictators throughout history. These savages commit atrocities in Syria and kill innocent people, and militants supported by the U.S. commit these crimes. The UK, France, Turkey, and the Persian Gulf Cooperation Council member states have also recognized the militants fighting the Syrian government. Quote, the people of this country, Syria, will continue their resistance because they know that the age of hegemony is over, said the Ayatollah. Next up, we have Syrian rebels say Americans, Britons helped train them in Jordan. It says weeks before the Obama regime and other Western nations recognized a new Syrian opposition coalition as the legitimate representative of the Syrian people, the rebels were receiving training in the use of light and heavy weapons with the backing of Jordanian, British, and U.S. governments. And I don't see anything about Saudi Arabia or Israel. It says here the training took place as far as back as October and involved hundreds of rebels says here that they believe that American intelligence officers observed what was taking place, i.e. they were, like I said, funneling them those Stinger missiles and stuff like that from Libya. Says another said he believed British officers were helping to organize the training. By November, another rebel said the training had expanded to anti-tank weapons and Stinger anti-aircraft missiles. Syrians are sounding the alarm over growing food shortages. This is what I was talking about. Bread is scarce in major cities and towns. Infant formula in extremely short supply. Fuel costs is skyrocketing. You have civilians in Syria face an acute food crisis that might end up basically in starvation. So I'm not trying to preach at you or anything, but this is a common quote that I've seen as far as this whole Syria thing goes. Not saying that this is the word of God. I'm saying that the people that are carrying this out know about this, and that there's a good chance that they try to mirror that prophecy or whatever you want to call it. Basically, Isaiah 17:1, the burden of Damascus, behold, Damascus is taken away from being a big city and shall be a ruinous heap. So it'll cease to be a city and become a heap of ruins, is basically what they say. Also says Israel's bulwark against Syria. I don't know if that's Turkey or who that is. But either way, Russia in a shift sees rebels' victory in Syria. Remember, we were just talking about that possible deal that went on, and I'm not sure if that actually happened, but U.S. says remarks show Moscow is moving away from Assad. Russia's top envoy for the Middle East affairs was quoted as saying, "We have to face the facts that the trend is that the Syrian regime and government are losing more and more control and more territory. Unfortunately, the opposition could prevail." So this was the first public omission of that prospect. It's interesting, they said moving away from Assad. Then the next one we have Russia wakes up to Syria reality. State Department spokesman Victoria Nuland told in a news briefing, quote, "We want to commend the Russian government for finally waking up to the reality and acknowledging that the regime's days are numbered." But I'm not really sure how much they're actually helping them to begin with. Russia never changed position on Syria, says Foreign Ministry. Foreign Ministry spokesman said that the U.S. State Department are misinterpreting the facts. He noted that the U.S. State Department has been excessively enthusiastic about Russia finally waking up and changing its position on Syria. Says we were never asleep, nor did we change our position. But for whatever it's worth, if Russia isn't a completely Zionist-occupied country like the United States and the rest of those countries that are working with the Zionists, who you think wouldn't, like Qatar and them, but if they are still a sovereign nation, then like I said before, they have an interest to keep Syria up and going for their own security. But if they start to get involved and publicly back Syria, the current government, well, then they will be up there with, Assad as the bad boogeyman and stuff like that, the evil dictator. And then, I just don't see that happening. So they'll go through the way of proxy wars using rebels and mercenaries and jihadists, basically terrorists and that, on both sides. That's what the West is doing, and who knows if Russia and Iran are doing it. They probably are. But like I've mentioned before, once Syria falls, then it opens the door to more terrorists in the Caucasus and Dagestan. Basically, it's Russia's version of Al-Qaeda, and they're being sent by the Saudis and the Sunnis and all them. And actually, just today, I haven't seen it in a while, there was 3 militants that were killed by Russian authorities in Dagestan. So, no change in Russia position on Syria, says Iran. They said that Tehran and Moscow share similar views on Syria, stressing that there has been no change in the Russian position on the Syrian government, which is they both support Syrians and national dialogue and are against foreign intervention in the country. NATO says Syrian Scuds hit near Turkey. I don't know if I believe this, but it says rockets landing near Turkey worrisome, says NATO. Syria denies firing the long-range missiles. But even if they did, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's very telling, right? If they're saying that they're landing fairly close to the Turkish border, it means that they're firing at the rebels, which are running across the border to get rearmed by the Turkish government. Pentagon to send missiles, Patriot missiles, along with Germany's Patriot missiles, and 400 troops to Turkey. Like I said before, Turkey is a big NATO country. They already have a bunch of U.S. troops, so it's not a big deal, but it is a sign. And we can't forget that this could be pointed towards Russia. Thank you.